Hello and welcome to Talking Bottom. I'm Paul Tanter.
I'm Matt Brooks.
And I'm Ange Pearson.
And we are honoured to be joined by a very special guest this week. There are few men as instrumental in the rise and popularity of alternative comedy as this person. Many of the comedy legends we know and love got their big break after he saw them at the Comedy Store, and as a fledgling producer gave them their TV debuts. As a TV executive, he brought the Royal Family and The Office to the screen, and Anton Deck to primetime television. He introduced Gordon Ramsay to America and is the founding chairman of Comic Relief. As a producer and director, he's worked on shows as varied as The Two Ronnies, Carrots Lib, Three of a Kind, Cannon and Ball, Girls on Top, Saturday Live and Benidorm. He also directed episodes of, and literally brought to television, Red Dwarf, The Young Ones, Filthy Rich and Catflap, and the pilot episode of Bottom. Paul Jackson, welcome and thank you for joining us and for shaping our childhood funny bones. It's a privilege to have you here talking Bottom with us today.
Well, I have to say, after an intro like that, I've come a long way to get that intro, so I'm fine.
It's fantastic
Good to be here, guys.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic to have you here with us. You joined the BBC in 1971 as what was then known as a call boy, I believe. Was that an ad you answered by mistake?
No, it was, listen, you'll have to do the dates because I am hopeless at dates. But that sounds right. I knew I wanted to go into the BBC. My dad worked at the BBC and I didn't want to actually join while he was there. I joined about 18 months after he retired. But at that time, to get into the BBC on the kind of production pathway, was that you had to go to a department called Studio Management, which Ed, I know, has explained to you, Ed Byers explained to you. And there were 4 grades. I think there was the runners, what you'd call now a runner, or they called it a floor assistant, but it had until very recently been called a call boy. And then there was the AFM, vision mixer, floor manager, and they were the 4 roles. And so, yes, I joined as a floor assistant or runner, and they did call them call boys. In fact, one of the guys, the old guys still doing it with us, was an extraordinary man called Monsieur Eddie Gray. And Monsieur Eddie Gray had been one of the crazy gang, would you believe?
That sounds like a bottom character, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Monsieur Eddie Gray. He was by this time he was in his 60s, and he'd been in the business all his life. And he was the crazy gang with 3 couples. Norton and Wayne and Flanagan Allen, and Eddie was the kind of spare one, and he was a floor. Anyway, they called them call boys, and it was said at the time that they had to change the name because we were all men at that time. The whole department was men, and they thought it would be a good idea maybe to get some women in, but they couldn't call them call girls, so they decided to call them floor assistants. And genuinely, people used to talk like that. Oh, we'll have to change it then to floor assistant. So yeah, I joined as a floor assistant.
How times have changed, and of course you worked your way up to senior producer. Just to ask, was that always the plan then, or had you other aspirations?
I never had a plan, Andrew. I've been so lucky with my career. I knew I wanted to do this. When I was a kid, I thought I wanted to act or be a comedian. I was always very keen on comedy. And my parents, who had both been actors, and my dad by this time was a TV producer, said, no, you go to university first. You've got to, this is a really, really difficult, dangerous way to make a living. And so I went to uni, I did some drama, I became social secretary, I started putting on big concerts with bands like The Who and The Nice and Swinging Blue Jeans. I mean, it was a great time. And I started to think, do you know what, I'm better at organising this stuff than I am at maybe. And so I thought I'll become a producer. But to be a producer, to join the BBC at this runner level, you had to have theatre experience. And I mean, a year or 2 years. And you had to have a degree. So when I interviewed for 2 jobs, the final board, there were 12 of us, and we were all stage managers and degree level. And then once I was in, I just wanted to do, I always loved comedy. I just think there's a certain, when you see one man or one woman, nowadays thank God one woman, standing at a microphone with nothing. And I mean, it may be in the older days more often it was that material had been prepared for them. But as that moment's there, they're standing there. And nowadays, very often they've written it. And there is them and the mic, and there's a room full of people, and they bring joy and extraordinary levels of joy and excitement to that. And to me, it's magical. It still is to this day. It always has been magical. So I knew I wanted to be around comedians, and all through my youth, my dad was a producer in the entertainment department, so I spent a lot of time at Shepherd's Bush, the old Shepherd's Bush Empire, which was the BBC TV theatre, watching people like Benny Hill, I have to say, Dave King, Charlie Chester, Ted Ray. I used to go and watch them rehearse. Occasionally I'd stay in the evening to watch. I just loved them. I used to listen to the radio shows Round the Horn and Beyond Our Ken and Haven't a Clue.
Were there any people that you admire growing up that you then saw at that stage and like, oh, I want to come and tell them?
Like people like Charlie Chester and Ted Ray had retired, not passed away necessarily, but retired. I tell you one experience I do very much remember of that. But when I was about 15, 16, whatever it was, my parents took me to see Beyond the Fringe. Now, Beyond the Fringe was the definitive comedy show for my generation. must have been in the West End about 63. I think it started in Edinburgh in 62 maybe, and it came to the West End in 63. Absolute sensation here, and then went to New York, sensation in New York. And that was Peter Cook, Dudley Moore, Alan Bennett, Jonathan Miller. And they were gods to me. And I remember going to see that show with my parents, and all those cliches that you talk about, I was literally slipping out of my seat with laughter. I had a stitch and I was crying. I mean, all those things you say about comedy, talk about blow the bloody doors off. I mean, it just was everything that you couldn't talk about, just parodied. And when you see Peter Cook there doing Harold Macmillan with the nuclear button, and I press it or I don't press it, depending on how I feel, and you think that Macmillan went and saw that and sat in the audience and watched it. It was sensational. I knew then, I thought to myself, this is what I've got to do. And years later, I got to work with Peter quite a lot. And when we were doing Saturday Live, Peter actually hosted one of the live shows for us. And we went round, a bloke called David Bell and myself, who was my boss at London Weekend, where we made Saturday Live. He knew Alan very well. And we went round to tea in his wonderful house, where Lady in the Van is recorded up in Mornington Crescent up there. And we had tea with Alan, and lovely tea and a long chat about the one. And then he said, why have you come to see me? And I said, well, would you like to... And he said, not a chance, dear boy. If that's what you've come for, I'm so sorry. There's absolutely no chance. And it was just lovely to have tea with him anyway. And then in the evening, as we were waiting to go on Peter's show, I told him this story. And he said, bloody sensible. I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. What a good answer. So I did get to work with two of my absolute gods. Sadly, not Dudley Moore, and certainly not Jonathan, who was on a different level by then.
You found that you were sort of, as you say, better at sort of organising things and so forth. I believe we discovered that you tried a bit of stand-up early on, and you tried writing your own sitcom as well, based on a flat share that you were in at university?
No, not quite. I did try both performing and writing, but in a very protected way. So when I was in the theatre, I did do a bit of acting. And I had a terribly embarrassing experience because I was at the Marlow in Canterbury, and they were doing School for Scandal, the Sheridan drama. And there's a big drunk scene in the middle of the play, and I was playing the leader of these drunken revellers, and we had to sing a song. And I said to the director, David Cossey, I can't sing, David. And he said, don't be silly, you're supposed to be drunk, it doesn't matter, anybody can sing a bit. And I said, honestly, I can't sing. Right, come on, let's all have a go. And I did about 2 lines, and he stopped me and said, you really can't sing, can you? This is okay, what we'll do is all do it as a chorus, and Paul, you just mime, don't you sing at all. So, I knew that I'd made the right decision. I wasn't a good enough performer, but I've always loved performing. I love doing the warm-ups before shows, not the big warm-up, but, the introduction warm-up, which I think is a very good thing for a director to do anyway, because it gives you a very immediate sense of what the audience is like, and all audiences are different. And when you're up in the gallery cutting, the speed at which the audience is going to react and the generosity of the reaction is very helpful to know. So I like to go on first. And I did a bit of after-dinner speaking, and I always wanted to be funny. But, the fact is I wasn't good enough. I certainly never made any money on the circuit as an after-dinner speaker, so I knew I wasn't a performer. And then writing, when we were doing Three of a Kind, we took gags from everywhere. Anybody could write in. And I wrote a couple of gags then, and then I edited the book when we put the book of Three of a Kind together, and I slipped a couple more in there. But I knew I couldn't do it. Sitcom thing was when Rik and Lisa and Ben brought me the script for Young Ones, the very original handwritten on A4 script. I immediately recognised, they told me it was coming and I couldn't wait to read it. I'd lived in a flat in Exeter. I went to Exeter. I'd lived in a flat at 40 Pennsylvania Road with a gang of people who are still my friends to this day, some of them. And we'd lived exactly that lifestyle. And so when I read that script, I said to them, well, this is absolutely, I know exactly what you're talking about. And in fact, the design and the original, we ended up filming in Bristol, but that was only because we were looking kind of around Exeter way. And the look of the flat and everything was exactly based on our flat. And then Rik and Ade said, well, that's our flat. Like all student flats. But
everyone who watches The Young Ones recognises their student living in it.
Living in it. It's only a very slightly exaggerated version. Drawing the biro mark on the milk and writing your name on the eggs and all that stuff. So I very much recognised it. But no, I wish I had the skill, because I think, as I say, I think the gift to make people laugh is such an important gift, particularly in this fucked up world that we're living in at the moment. My God, if you can't laugh, you're going to shoot yourself, aren't you? And God, do we need some comedy? And unfortunately, I don't think we're terribly well served at the moment with the best of comedy. It's in the slight doldrums, it seems to me, at the moment. But, the gift of that release and the importance of that ability to question authority and to say, hang on a minute, you're being really stupid here, is so important. There's a huge gift in music. If you can just sit down at a piano, whether you're Elton John or my brother, and just play a few riffs and everybody starts singing, I think that's such a brilliant thing, and I wish I could do that.
Yeah, but comedy's not lauded at the same level as music, wrongly so, I think.
Well, I tell you why I think, Matt, the reason is because it's not so universal. I mean, if you're Elton John, everybody gets it. If you're Rick Mayall, genius that he is on the same level to me as Elton in his field. But Americans don't get it. Australians get it, New Zealanders get it, but Europeans don't.
Yeah,
so
but the young ones, like, lit a fire for me when I was a kid. My dad hated it and was just like, what's this stupid rubbish you're watching?
Well, that's exactly what we wanted. That's
so
exactly
angry.
We wanted nobody else to like it. That was the whole point. We didn't want anybody else to say, oh, that's really good. And I was still doing the Two Ronnies when we did the first series of... And by the way, all due respect to the Two Ronnies, who taught me everything I know about putting comedy on television and were very, very good personal friends. Ronnie Corbett particularly. They just did the show about his private films last week on ITV, and he was such a lovely, lovely man, a lovely family, and we were very close to them. So I don't disparage that at all, but that was a show that you wanted 15 million people to watch and all love. Here's a funny thing. So the Two Ronnies, 15, 20 million sometimes, major primetime Saturday night. And we issued a sketchbook around the same time as we issued the Young Ones book. The Young Ones book sold 3 million. The Two Ronnies book sold less than 1 million. It's a different thing. If it was Young Ones, you had to have everything to do with Young Ones. If it was Two Ronnies, they're brilliant on Saturday night. I may even go and see them at the Palladium, but I don't want to buy a book of them.
I saw you say in an interview that when you were doing that, you sort of took a lot of the crew and the people from the Two Ronnies to go and make the Young Ones. Were the Two Ronnies themselves aware of what you were doing, and were they supportive of it?
Ronnie Corbett was always a massive, massive comedy fan. And it's fairly well known. He had a house up on the golf links just outside Edinburgh. And every year he used to go to the Fringe and look at people. And he first told me to go and see Harry Hill. First time I saw Harry Hill, Ronnie had recommended him. First time I saw Rob Brydon, Ronnie had recommended him. He was a huge supporter of young comedians. RB, not so much. And in fact, we had a falling out with RB on, would it have been Three of a Kind? Yes, Three of a Kind. But when we were first making it, the wonderful thing about the BBC was at that time, and God, we just threw it away so carelessly, it was the best studio outside of Hollywood. It had the best visual effects, the best makeup, the best wardrobe. It had the best gram library in the world. It had the best sound effects library in the world. You couldn't have wanted anywhere else better to do something as difficult and as challenging as Young Ones or Red Dwarf, or indeed Bottom. And the reason that Bottom stayed at the BBC and wasn't made by Noel Gay Television or by Rik and Ade Productions Limited was because they wanted access, just like French and Saunders never went on their own, because they wanted that BBC backup. So I was lucky enough, because it was Two Ronnies, you got the best camera crew, the best visual mix, the best sound guys, and people like Roger Fenner and Mike McCarthy and Laurie Taylor and Ed Wood and the editor, and all these people came across because I managed to grab them for Young Ones, and then they went on to do Red Dwarf and other shows like that. So Ronnie was always very encouraging. Ronnie C. Ronnie B. more tended to think that it was a bit scurrilous and a bit toilet wall, and then we did a parody of a Two Ronnies end big music item
On Not the 9 O'Clock News.
It was done on Not the 9 O'Clock News.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you for reminding me. That's exactly what happened.
The Two Ninnies.
The Two Ninnies. That's right. And do you want to know the story of that?
Oh, well, I know that Ronnie Barker was annoyed. I got a question about this for later on, but I'm happy to ask it now. I wondered if you thought it was fair game.
When we did the Two Ronnies, we did these big music items, and Barker wrote some of them. No, Barker wrote a lot of the Two Ronnies, but he didn't write that many of the music items. But occasionally he'd do a Top of the Pops parody or something like that. And this one show, I was directing the Ronnies by then, we were doing a Top of the Pops parody. And he said to me, Paul, you know all these young people, because Ronnie Hazelhurst was the BBC in-house MD. And Ronnie used to do all the orchestrations and conduct the orchestra for these parodies. And he said to me, Paul, we need a younger sound. We need somebody who knows how these songs that we're parodying are made. And I was working with Peter Bruce at the time, who of course done the title track for the Young Ones. I said, well, I get Peter will do it. And Peter came in and met with Ronnie, and Ronnie gave him the songs, which is how it normally worked. Peter wrote the music, and that was it, and they did it. And then Peter said, so do I get a credit? And Ronnie said, no, I wrote the songs, you just put a tune to it. And Peter was upset, and moot point that should have been sorted out before probably, but Peter was upset. And so Peter subsequently wrote and instigated and wrote the music for Not the Nine sketch.
Right.
And Ronnie was really very, very upset.
Yeah.
And actually wrote to the DG complaining. And, yeah.
Did Ronnie Corbett sort of take it in a bit more?
No,
humour?
Ronnie wasn't.
Oh, okay.
Ronnie wasn't bothered. No.
I mean, you've worked with some incredible comedy pairings over the years, the Two Ronnies, Harry H. Corbett and Wilfred Bramble, Craig Charles and Chris Barry.
You say the bottom flats like Steptoe. I actually AFM'd, which is the level that you put out all the props and do all that stuff on the last series of Steptoe.
What was that like working on the final series of Steptoe and Son?
Well, I tell you, the wonderful thing about working with Steptoe and Son was working with Galton and Simpson, the legendary kings, the original, after Muir and Norden, the godfathers of British comedy, really. And those four between them, and really more Galton and Simpson, they're the reason that British television comedy is completely different from American comedy. American comedy is gag-driven. And, in such a competitive commercial market, you have to have a gag a page, if not two or three. And I've been lucky enough to sit in American writing rooms and watch American shows being produced. And they're driven by that kind of, if you like, almost Jewish stand-up shtick that was done around the music halls and the vaudeville halls. Galton and Simpson were really drama writers, and Steptoe is really a drama it's just a drama where there's no story development. They're both locked into this endless agony. That style of character comedy, which you now see absolutely taken to the extreme in the real coms, where there really are no jokes at all, and it's all just based on observational character work. That was instigated by Galton and Simpson. I think if they hadn't been as influential as they were at the very beginning of comedy with Hancock and then with Steptoe, we wouldn't necessarily have gone in that direction.
I mean, the comedy duo, would obviously Rik and Ade had their influences through Galton and Simpson's work. What do you think it is about the comedy duo that makes for such a perfect chemistry in comedy?
Well, I think comedy is a social habit. It's why I think it's so important. So it always amazes me that one person sitting on their own in a room can actually write anything funny at all, because how do you know? And yet, clearly, over the years, many, many people have succeeded in doing that very successfully. But, Marks and Grands and Clement Lefrene and Grant Naylor and Rik and Ade, so many of them, whether writers or performers, because they make each other laugh. And what you notice with the Two Ronnies or Rik and Ade or French and Saunders, if one of them doesn't think it's funny, it's out. I mean, there's never a debate. Oh, can't we? Don't you think? No. If we're not both laughing at it, it's out. Whether that's in rehearsal or reading a script or whatever. Because if you can't make the other person laugh, then what chance have you got? So
you've got that sounding board there.
You've got that sounding board, that constant sounding board. And I think to sit at a typewriter on your own and just type into the ether and then look at that and think, oh, that's funny. Yeah, I know. No, that's exactly right. I don't need another line there. How do you do that without another person in the room to do it with you?
I always thought Ben Elton and Richard Curtis had the great system for Blackadder, didn't they? When their rule was if one of them took out a joke, the other one wasn't allowed to put it back in. And that way you could only ever add new stuff. So there was no sort of fights about, I want to keep this.
In essence, that's how all the great comedy pairings work, as I say, whether performers or... With the Two Ronnies, we used to sit down on every Monday morning. We used to record on Sunday, Monday back in the rehearsal room. And we'd read all through the scripts for the upcoming week, including the first cut of the news items. So there'd be about 30 or 40 news items. And it's just a very simple rule. They read them round the table. There was 10 or 12 people around the table. And it didn't matter what we thought. They put a tick or a cross, and that was the end of it. 2 ticks in, 1 cross out. And it's the same, and Ben actually is the most collaborative and the most flexible, one of the most flexible writers I've ever worked with. They've devised this wonderful system with him and Richard where they wrote backwards and forwards. Whereas with Rik, it was more because Rik brought him in, Rik and Lisa brought, and it was more kind of his work got edited by Rik and Lisa.
Yeah, I've heard a few stories of like they were genuinely were friends, but Rik was a little bit bully-like to Ben, but in a playful way, like "come on, squirt," all this sort of thing, right?
Ben had been 2 years below Rik and Ade at uni, and so when Ben got to uni and was writing a play a week, serious and comic, and Rik and Ade with the superstars, because I mean Rik and Ade definitely at 20th Century Coyote at Manchester Uni was like the superstars. And I think probably there was the kind of master and servant relationship that a little bit carried over, but I mean Ben's his own man, he can look after himself. Always spoke very highly of Rik and what he brought to his material and what he did for him, and Rik was well aware of what Ben gave to him, but occasionally Rik would jokingly say, "Oh, snotty nose," or "Oik, you've just come up," where it was a kind of running gag, really.
So on the Two Ronnies, how did you manage to go from floor runner to director? Was that a sort of fairly typical trajectory?
Well, no, I was just really lucky. I mean, the way the BBC worked, it really was dead man's shoes, and I was incredibly lucky. I went up very quick. So I went in as a runner. I was lucky enough to get invited onto the Two Ronnies as a runner, and you make yourself as useful as you can. I just loved being there. So I really... And then something happened. Somebody moved up and they wanted an AFM. And so then you're in the team. You're not just doing it. The floor assistant only turns up on the studio and just does the studios. The AFM's on the team right through the whole shoot. So I got on the team and I did a couple of seasons of that. And then I went off to be a vision mixer. And unbelievably, the vision mixer who did the Two Ronnies for some reason wasn't available. And they said, "Oh, well, let Paul do it." I mean, why would they let a almost trainee vision mixer?
Yeah.
And the truth was because they knew exactly what they were doing, and you just had to go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So, and I did that, and then I started to edit stuff. So I just was so lucky. Terry Hughes, who had run it all my time when I was a junior, got promoted to head of department. So there was a gap there, and I just stepped up, and I didn't work with them for about 2 or 3 years after I started there, and I only stayed there 11 years on my first go. So that middle 7 or 8 years, I literally did every grade up to being the exec producer and the director and producer at the end. And as I say, I just learned everything I knew about it. I mean, it was very lucky. You didn't normally get that chance, no.
Do you think that's a good way for someone to become a producer ultimately, to do all of the jobs to sort of get to that position?
I think we were incredibly lucky, and it's one of the many things about the loss of the BBC, and we have lost the BBC as it was when I knew it.
But I mean, do you think that prepares someone? Do you think that makes someone a better producer because they know how all the jobs are done? Yeah.
I absolutely do. And you had the chance to do that at the BBC. I mean, in fact, you didn't only have the chance to do it. There's only way to do it. They didn't bring producers in those days who were already a producer somewhere else.
Okay.
So if you wanted to be, you went up, and then when you became the first assistant or the production manager, they called them then, but first you went into the department. So at that point, I had to choose. I'd quite enjoyed my sport as well at the BBC, so I'd done quite a lot on Grandstand and Sports Night with Coleman on a Wednesday night. But I kind of knew it was comedy. I was a little bit. There was a moment where I thought, "Oh, I might be." And then jobs came up in the entertainment department, Bill Cotton's department, and I remember being interviewed by Bill. And I'd known Bill since I was a kid because my dad had worked alongside Bill, and I loved Bill Cotton. I mean, genius of television, beautiful, beautiful man. I was interviewed by Bill and Terry Hughes, who had produced the Ronnies. He knew me, and I got the job. And then you're in entertainment then, so that now
What memories do you have of working with Harry H. Corbett and Wilfred Bramble?
Fond memories. I mean, it was strange because Steptoe had been off for some time. I can't remember how long. It was suddenly, let's do it again. In fact, it was the only time it was shot in colour. It's been colourised since, with a lovely, lovely comedy producer called Dougie Argent. And in those days, the producer directed, and so Dougie was producer-director. He hadn't been the original producer. So it's all a bit kind of new, and they hadn't been there for some time. In a way, they had been the biggest thing on television, probably. Certainly the biggest comedy. And now a bit later on, they sort of quite weren't. And it was a bit flat, maybe, compared to what they had been. Wilfred was a lovely, lovely old bloke. And the disgrace of what happened to him with the police on Shepherd's Bush Green was just atrocious. Blighted part of his life, Harry had this thing that he was a big Shakespearean actor. He was a great actor. He'd never loved the fact that he was so much better known for Steptoe than he was for any of his other work. And, of course, admitting that and coming back later in life when he probably said internally to himself, "That's it, I'm done, I'm now." So it was maybe a little bit more subdued. For me, it was an absolute treat. I was still quite young. I was still quite new at the BBC. It was lovely working with Harry and with Wilfred. I loved Dougie and I loved working on his team. But for me, it was Galton and Simpson, just sitting and watching Ray and Alan. And they became sort of friends. And I used to see them afterwards. I had lunch with them occasionally. And God, they were lovely men, the two of them. They were just such wonderful, wonderful, talented men who shaped the way that we do television and comedy in this country.
Absolutely. And you'd grown up then watching Steptoe in the early years on telly?
Yes, I watched Steptoe. I watched Likely Lads. I watched, of course, Python in a different part of the forest.
And you got to work with the Pythons as well, is that right?
I got to work with Graham because he and Barry Cryer wrote a sitcom that Ronnie Corbett did called Prince of Denmark. I've worked with John a few times. Terry Jones did a guest appearance on Young Ones. I haven't worked with Eric.
I see, because there's an incorrect thing then that you worked on Python in your
I didn't.
catalogue.
No, the only connection I would claim with Python was that in those days, in the 60s, the BBC was such a bloody fantastic place to work. And in the same way that when I just joined the BBC, I used to, as a runner, when I used to go in on days off and watch the Python, because the Pythons would be in the watch the Python show rehearse, just go and sit in the stalls because you had the pass, you could walk in. And they were kind of like an alien satellite. They were out there was a car park at the back of the scenery block. And that show was produced, as far as I remember, from these caravans in the back of, or static homes or whatever, in this car park at the back. It was kind of not, they're not really in the department at all. We don't really know what they. And when we got to do the young ones, we kind of felt a bit the same. We kind of felt like nobody wanted to talk to us or know anything about it, really.
Yeah.
And that was very, and talk about with Bottom, I mean, it was even more so. But with Young Ones, it was kind of, well, it seems to be popular. Young Ones only got commissioned because Channel 4 picked up those people. My old colleague, Mike Bolland, I'd shown it at a youth conference at the BBC, and about a month later, Mike had gone to Channel 4 as Commissioner of Youth Entertainment, and the bastard nicked my bloody pilot and signed all these people up. And I remember the day that Jeremy Isaacs announced the big launch announcement of Channel 4, and there was Five Go Mad in Dorset right in the middle of the first night. And I got this phone call saying, aren't they those blokes that are in your pilot? This pilot that had, been shot, and oh my God, and put that in the basement. Yeah. Oh, do you think you can get it together again in time before Channel 4 goes on the air? And this was in the spring, in the autumn. So we shot it over the summer, and of course they went out with the one Five Go Mad, and we went out with a whole series of young ones. So
you were hurriedly commissioning 5 scripts to get them out as quickly as
possible. And we were desperately saying because they didn't write 5 scripts on spec. I mean, they'd written the pilot. I never told them that it was a definite no, but I mean, I'd been told, hey, we've got worse. He wasn't the executive making the decision, but one of the executives in the department said to me, I've got bigger flops than that in the vault. Don't worry, nobody will know about it. It'll be all right.
How they sort of provisionally started shaping ideas for the rest of the series?
I think they always had, they were very creative people. And so I think when they were writing the first script, they had a million ideas they couldn't get into the first script. So there were ideas around for sure. And my God, they wrote those 5, they wrote them very, very quickly. Ben is a very quick writer. Ben's one of the quickest writers I've ever known. And Rik and Lisa were very integral to the writing of Young Ones, as opposed to Filthy Rich, which Ben wrote on his own, really. But Ben was the driver, Ben was the bloke who sat the typewriter and got the words down. And so they wrote them very quickly, and without much editing, we pretty well shot them as they came off the press, really.
What are your sort of recollections of the first time, if you can, if this is easily recallable and it hasn't sort of turned into the stuff of legend, when you first saw Rik and Ade at the Comedy Store?
Well, I remember it very well, because what had happened was this comedy boom in the 80s started in America, and in Los Angeles, places like the Improv and the Comedy Store. Peter Rosengard, the entrepreneur, who was actually insurance salesman, had been in Los Angeles, seen the Comedy Store, and thought, I must do that. And he opened up the Comedy Store in the Nell Gwyn. And I didn't go to the first night, but it got a buzz immediately. Time Out was just launching at the time, and Time Out started writing it up. Evening Standard gave it a very good write-up. So within about 10 days, I think, I thought, I've got to go and see this. I was a junior, but I hadn't directed anything at the time. I was at director's school, I think, actually. BBC in those days actually taught you to be a director.
Fantastic.
How old were you at this time?
32, 33. So I thought, I must go and see this. And the Comedy Store was, I think, probably Friday and Saturday or Saturday and Sunday at the Nell Gwyn Club, which was a striptease club, just off Wardour Street. And so the first time I went, I was walking up Wardour Street, and I was very lucky when I was a kid because of what my dad did, and my mum was very liberal-minded. Even at 16, 17, I was kind of out in the West End and watching stuff, and that was 63, 64, and so I was up at the Crawdaddy watching the Stones, and I was at the Marquee. And then I went into that first night at the Comedy Store, and I came out thinking, that's the same thing. It's not going to be the global thing that 60s music was, because it's not music, but it's going to be as big. I knew when I sat there and watched them, and it was rough as old arseholes, and nobody knew what they were. They were shambling around the stage and throwing beer at each other, and it was a complete mess, really.
That's part of it, right?
But these and the crowd was to get to the Nell Gwyn, you had to go up in this rickety old lift that took ages to go up and down. God knows if there'd been a fire. And you were about 4 people at a time in the lift. So it looked really exciting because the queue was right down Wardour Street, because it took you an hour to get in because of this bloody lift. Anyway, you got in there, and it was it was like the Marquee used to be in the 60s in the music. It was low and sweaty and hot. boozy, and I just absolutely loved it. Alexei came out, and Alexei was comparing by that time. Rik and Ade did a bit as Coyote. Peter and Richard did a bit as Outer Limits. Then they did a bit together, the four of them. Tony Allen was there.
Had you heard their names before?
I'd kind of seen them in the some of the reviews had mentioned some of these names. Keith Allen was the big breakout star. Keith was the one that everybody was raving about, and he was. I mean, Rik and Keith particularly. You don't have to be a genius to realise that these are very talented, very charismatic, talented people. You just have to look at them. You know, I mean, they just have it. And I mean, Rik was just a sex god, and you just had to walk into a room and you were all swooning. And Keith was the same. He had absolute balls out confidence, and I love Keith. I mean, I really, really, he's a great actor now, but then he was just a wild boy, really. And he had become the hot thing within 3-4 months. It was like the hottest ticket in town. And I went down there one night. There was a table marked out reserved at the very front of the stage, which is very unusual at the Comedy Store. You know, I mean, it was not like that at all. After the show had started, to everybody's annoyance, this group of rather loud people turned up, rather loud fashionistas turned up and sat in this table and started making quite a noise. And this one bloke was saying, see, this one's very good. He's very good. And this went on and people were getting really annoyed. And then Keith came out and they started doing it in front. And Keith said, what the fuck are you? Have you come here for nobody's come here to see you. Shut the fuck up. And the bloke said, don't talk to me like that. I made you. And he said, what? He said, I made you. I did that right up for you in the Evening Standard. He said, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realise that was you. He picked this pint of beer up and tipped it over his face. This guy had quite a nice suit. Tipped it over his head. And he said, oh, fucking mate, you fuck off out of it. I'm not doing it. Fuck off out of it. You can just fuck off. And he made this bloke completely ripped him apart. And I just loved it. I just loved that.
To do that to a reviewer.
To do that to a reviewer. He did not.
I tell you, a good review as well.
Yeah. I just love the chutzpah of Keith. You know, he's got a persona about it. And Rik had that same. He was going to be a star whatever happened. You know, there's no question about it.
So you see this group of performers, you know there's something there. You're working at the BBC. You've yet to produce or direct anything.
That's right.
How difficult a pitch is this to the BBC? We understand that you wanted quite a few episodes of Boom Boom Out Got the Lights, and there was a bit of a compromise in that.
What happened was I left the club that night having thought to myself, this is going to be something. Some of these people are going to be big breakout stars. And annoyingly, I had just finished the director's course, in fact, I remember now. So I couldn't, otherwise I'd just done it as my exercise, because at the director's course you get to do an exercise, and I hadn't. So I went to my boss, a bloke called Robin Nash, in the entertainment department, don't forget, not in the comedy department. And I said to him, Robin, there's this thing happening, this new comedy breaking through. I'd really like to bring it to TV and do a show. Randomly and madly, he said to me, oh, I think I know what you mean. I was at a cafe the other night. He said, I saw a show there. It's actually done by 5 girls who were in the BBC drama series Angels, which was a hospital series. And these 5 women in the downtime in the summer had put on this show about a broken love affair, essentially 5 aspects of a broken love affair. And he said, and I really like that. And I was wondering what to do with it. And he said, well, actually, and this is how the BBC used to work, and I said, we've got a bit of a opportunity because there's a studio being booked for something and we can't do it. The bloke's dropped out or whatever it was. And I've got a 2-day studio stand in about a month's time. Why don't you go and have a look at George, it was called. Why don't you go and have a look at George and see if you like it, and then you can do one on one night, you can do whatever you want on your night. So I said, great, okay. I went and saw this. It could not have been more different. I mean, it was lovely, but it was a rather American-style cabaret, kind of knowing, you know, as I say, 5 aspects of a love affair, written by an American woman called Susan. And it was good, but it wasn't anything like the same thing. But it was set in a cabaret venue. Yeah. So I went back to Rob and said, yeah, no, that's fine. I'll do that the first night and I'll do what I want the second night. So we set up this nightclub in a studio. And I needed a linking device for my show. I mean, George, we just recorded it was fine. We needed a linking device. And I was also watching a lot of music at the time, and I loved the Paul Jones band. He'd just set up his blues band. So I asked them, would they link it? And then we took their song, Boom Boom Out Go the Lights, because it was just a good cut to black and go wherever you want. We did that first show. Robin looked at the 2 pieces, didn't really think George had worked, and you couldn't do it cabaret. You either needed to put it with proper sets and costumes and do it properly, or it didn't really work. It was a good piece in the theatre, but it didn't work on TV. And we looked at my thing, and they did not know what. And I have to tell you, I recorded over 2 hours. And I scraped together 28 minutes.
Really?
I mean, because it was so bloody amateur, and it was my first big thing. I didn't know how to control any of it. tell them to stop it. And I remember a comic who shall be nameless who wasn't in the final cut walking on and immediately going into stuff. Well, we're not allowed to say stuff, we can't do Bourneville Boulevard. And the guys in the gallery, I'm directing, sitting there, and the guys in the gallery looking at me, should we stop tape? Or, what is the point? And I said, no, it'll be all right. And actually Keith Allen rescued that whole thing. He came on and did the SAS. If you've ever seen the show, the SAS siege, the Iraqi embassy had happened just that week. And he burst on the stage with a balaclava helmet and some stun grenades, and the place went mad. And he did a very funny, quick sketch on the siege. But I was pushed to get 29 minutes out of it that was usable.
Right.
So we did that, and it went out, and it got very poor, not viewing figures. It wouldn't get good viewing figures, but it got a very poor reaction appreciation index.
But you managed to get another one about a year later.
Well, what happened was these people then, there was talk about them and people were noticing them. And actually, amazingly, somebody somewhere, Chris Dunkley in the Financial Times at one point gave us a very good review. I can't remember if it was the first Young Ones. I think it might have been actually. Anyway, people were sort of talking. And so Robin came back to me several months later and said, you know what, do you want to have another go? Now, they've maybe learnt a bit more. And that was the wonderful thing about the BBC at that time. As I say, it was like Python over in this shed in the car park. And and then eventually Jeff and I decamped over the road altogether, and we did a lot of shows, Carrots Lib particularly, from right over there. We didn't feel like we were part of the BBC at all. We didn't report back into them. That show was going out live. We never discussed it with them. We just did it.
Did you feel like what you were doing with Boom Boom and then later with the Young Ones was a sort of counter to the other kind of comedy that was on television, where it was either the comedians with Northern comics doing mother-in-law jokes or Oxbridge review type stuff? Did you feel like you're sort of deliberately trying to move away from that kind of thing?
Well, I think there definitely was. There was a movement against that, and that's what the alternative was. But I was slightly ambivalent about that because I'd come from that tradition, and indeed, let's be absolutely clear, Rik and Ben and Ade particularly, massive fans of Peter Cook, Dave Allen, Hancock. They were very Noel Coward. Ben's a huge Noel Coward scholar and fan. These guys know their heritage, they know where they're coming from. But there was maybe a little bit of a kind of golf club, dinner jacket circuit around, if you like. And certainly their performing circuit, this burgeoning comedy club circuit, first of all in London and then spreading out through Manchester and Birmingham and Bristol and places, was definitely the antithesis of the working men's club with the dinner jacket and the mother-in-law jokes. And certainly people like Bernard Manning, just to take a random example that I can think of immediately, were not perceived as being helpful to the state of the nation. It was the Thatcher years. There was a lot of dissension within the nation, and people like Charlie Williams was felt to be who was a black comedian who appeared on the Comedians, the Granada show, and was successful in that show. And we got a black comedian on. What are you talking about? It was felt he was kind of being used as a patsy, and so there was some anger. And I remember on never mind Young Ones, on Three of a Kind, which was Lenny Henry, Tracy Ullman, and David Copperfield. When we did the big outreach meeting at the very beginning of setting that show up, we said to the three artists, spoke to them, and between the four of us, we said to them, we don't want that kind of material. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for something a bit new and a bit fresh and a bit different. And so there was a conscious attempt to do different things. I have got the hugest respect and admiration, and I loved working on the Two Ronnies, and I don't believe that the Two Ronnies was in that vein. But Ronnie Corbett used to play golf and do the golf circuit and so on, and Ronnie was the most lovely man and the most encouraging supporter of new comedy and the most interested and inquiring mind about how comedy worked. But they were perceived as this big Saturday night mob and all very successful. And these were the punk, Ade is a massive punk music fan. This was the punk music as opposed to the concept album and Eric Clapton playing 15-minute obligatos.
It was the young upstarts taking on the old guard kind of thing.
Well, it was a little bit. Python had been there first to an extent and done that, and they were huge fans of Python as well. And I think maybe we a little bit too, the press loved to do that. I remember at the time it was all happening, John Lloyd was also at the BBC who produced at that time Not the Nine and went on to do Blackadder and so on. And John said to me, just as it was all breaking, he said, do you want to have lunch? I didn't know him that well. And I love John, I became good friends with him. And he said to me, Paul, look, I tell you what's going to happen. They're going to try and set up a competition. The press are going to follow this through. We're the new young kids on the block. We're all anti all that stuff, but they'll try and set up Red Brick, Oxbridge, and I'll be the Oxbridge and you'll be and he said, let's just agree between us never to play that game. If you have a hit, I'll be thrilled. If I have a hit, you be thrilled.
Yeah.
We'll just all celebrate it together. It's all about the funny. And that was a very wise thing of John, and we played it that way ever since. And I've loved most of what John's done, and he's always been kind about what I've done. So it was a very sensible thing to say, because I think it could have got out of hand. I never saw it as that, really. I just saw, funny's funny. You don't start analysing it too much. If it's funny, it's funny. So John said to me, let's not make this into a kind of red brick Oxbridge thing. And of course, the silly thing is that they all got on really well together. So famously, Stephen and Hugh and Emma did a BAFTA-winning episode of Young Ones, the University Challenge episode, Bambi. Rik and Ade interrupted a Stephen and Hugh sketch on Saturday Live, famously. And they got on really well together and worked really well together. So it was never really an issue, but it could have become one.
Wasn't Alexei Sayle saw a talk with you, him, Nigel Planner and stuff where you turning up and saying, "Oh, Stephen," that's it. No, I don't want to be involved then, or something that was half jokingly.
Yeah, that was Alexei tells that story. I remember the night you're talking about it, the NFI. Yeah. Alexei's relationship with Young Ones was just at one remove. So he wrote his own stuff. We'd tell him what the plot, or Rick and Lisa and Ben would tell him what the plot was. And he'd say, I tell you what, I'll be a train driver who's a bandit who's holding up the train, or I'll be, apart from the landlord, I'll come in there and I'll do this and I'll do that. So he used to really almost phone it in. He maybe come in once in rehearsal. So he was kind of just,
How did was that always intended, or was he kind
of
Yes,
they wanted Alexei to be in it. And the obvious idea, he clearly wasn't one of the students. So the fairly obvious idea to come up with, he was the landlord. And so they wrote Mr. Bolofsky. But he didn't want that to be a permanent written-in character. He wanted to do his own shtick, if you like. And so that was the kind of deal. We'll write you a storyline, or maybe we'll write you some lines even, but you can kind of improvise around it. So the famous scene with the clocks, when he comes in, that's Alexei's additional.
Did he get
line.
Additional credit line for it?
Yes, he got additional material credit. I'm pretty sure he gets additional credit. So when we were doing the Bambi episode at some meeting somewhere, we must have said, and Stockbridge College is going to be played by Stephen, Hugh and Emma. He said, I thought we were the alternative comics. I never thought I was going to. But I mean, he didn't say it with any malice.
Sure. So I remember as a kid not really understanding the Alexei Sayle kind of input to because at the end credit stuff, you get the silhouette of all five of them. I'm like, why is he there? I would think.
He was...
But he is one of the young ones. He's in every episode.
He was very much part of the initial sale. All those publicity shots and so on that I've still got somewhere. And there's always Alexei's. Well, actually, it's not true. There's a lot of them were just the four of them.
Yeah, all the not DVD, those wonderful VHS double packs that all look filthy with beans and stuff all dripping over it. That's one of the first things I was seeing of it. It's just those four on the front.
Well, that's right. But Alexei, he was very much a part of the initial sales pitch, for sure. And he was very much always going to be... I mean, there was never any moment where he said, I don't think I'll do this one. He was always in it. He was always part of it.
Mm-hmm. He was sort of one of the main stars of the Comedy Store, wasn't he?
The Comedy Store, he was the the big breakout mega comic was Keith. And Rik was the big sexy, but Alexei was there night after night, week after week. Everybody looked up to him, everybody respected him.
Yeah.
And he was the compare, and he compared Boom Boom because he was the obvious, he was the linchpin, if you like.
Comparing's the hardest part of putting on the...
Compare's a really, really difficult thing.
There's
a lot of people just can't do it. Arthur Smith's a very good compare. But it can be an unforgiving task. You come on after a dead comic, or you come after a brilliant comic. It's tough.
Yeah, I was reading the book "Didn't You Kill My Mother-in-Law?" Talking about the whole rise of that kind of thing, and the chap who launched the club was saying, I'm sure you know this story, but I was sort of ready to give up with all the, I had open auditions, and it was just constantly people who are told in the pub you're very funny, and they come along and they're terrible. And it wasn't until Alexei, two people that made him sort of go, right, this can work. Lee Corns and Alexei Sayle, apparently.
There you go.
Yeah,
that would be Peter Rosengard, this insurance guy
yeah.
I'm talking about. He was an insurance guy, and a very successful insurance guy, and he just went to Los Angeles for a holiday or something. Or, I don't know. Went to the Comedy Store and thought, I've got to do this. Came back, didn't bother to check whether there were enough comics, but just said, right, and he did this deal with the Nell Gwynn, and then, of course, found out there weren't that many comics. And people like Clive Hansen and Lenny Bennett and people turning up, doing their thing, which wasn't really quite fitting in. But Alexei, from the very beginning, I would say there's a good chance that if Alexei hadn't been there regularly at the very beginning, it wouldn't have lasted, because he was the go-to anchor point, you know.
Can you talk a little bit about the dig the Young Ones has on The Good Life in Series 2?
The Good Life sketch, which is just a brilliant sketch. I mean, that speech of AIDS is just a masterpiece of tour de force of performance, isn't it? I felt slightly guilty about doing it. I mean, I thought it was very funny, and there was no way I was going to say we couldn't do it. But the guy who produced The Young Ones, I'd worked with quite a lot. He was a guy called John Howard Davison. In fact, by this time, he was head of department, the comedy department at the BBC. But I liked John. I'd worked with him. He played Oliver in the original 1950s, 30s,
really?
whatever movie of Oliver. He's that little golden-haired boy.
The musical one or the black and white one?
No, the
before?
black and white
Okay.
Oliver, the actual, Oliver. And John was that little angel-faced boy. I knew him well, so I didn't tell him we were doing it. There was no problem getting the rights because we only just literally played the title music and then tore down the green screen, or actually blue screen, I think it was, and Ade came through. So that wasn't a problem. I don't even think we had to ask for the rights. I think being a BBC programme, you could just
Right.
use the clip. Anyway, we recorded it, and it was very funny, and I liked it. And I didn't say anything. And after it had gone out, a few days later, I was walking along the corridor, and there was John. And he looked at me, and he came up to me, and he said, I wish you hadn't done that. And he walked past, and I thought, well, that's very magnanimous, because you could have absolutely. And I said, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sure he was forgiving. It was all
He was fine. You know
Yeah.
what? He said, and he meant it, I wish I hadn't done it, but he was fine. And believe me, Felicity Kendall has few bigger fans than Rick Mayall. So
Well, that was clear from the laundrette.
I think
scene.
so. I think so.
So you're handed the pilot script for The Young Ones. What is it that sort of leapt out about it that was special to you?
So Rick and Lisa said, look, we want to do this. We've written this sitcom about, and obviously it's what we know. It's the four boys living in student digs. And I immediately thought 40 pen, right, okay, I know where I am. And it was biro written on A4, and it had, I always remember a coffee, I wish I'd kept it. It had a coffee mug thing on the front page. And I read it, and I just thought, whereas what I should have thought is this is unshootable. What I did think was, this is just fantastic. This is, I like them on stage, and I know they're going to be big, but I don't know what.
Yeah.
And now, this is what, because this is just incredible. And it spoke, I mean, it was a younger generation than mine, really, but I was still just about enough in touch to say, I'm only 10 years out of a student flat myself, and I kind of could see what it could be. And my next thought was, we can do this. This is
Yeah.
the BBC. We can do this. And if we can't, we'll find, okay, we'll admit we can't. But most of this we will be able to do with people like Johnny Bragg and Dave Howard and Laurie, Roger Fenner and Heather Gilder and these people, Ed Wood and editing. We can make this work.
Was it that same sort of feeling you'd had when you first went into the Comedy Store and you saw these new acts and you thought this is going to be big? Did you feel that like the same thing was going to happen
No, not
with
quite.
television?
When I saw them there, I say you can't sit in a room and watch Rick or Keith and indeed, many of the others. Let's be clear. I mean, Ade. Let's not forget Ade and Peter Richardson and Alexei. You can't sit and you think to yourself, well, these people are clearly going to be successful. I mean, they know how to do it. They're going to break through. And because it's different from anything that's going on at the moment, there will be a big movement. So I left that night thinking that, and that got reinforced over the next few months. When I read the script, I thought, and this is the vehicle that will do it. So I kind of knew what they could do already, and that was the wonderful thing. You read this script, and you knew exactly exactly who Vivian was, because I'd seen Ade doing it. So you could read it exactly knowing what it was going to be, and I just couldn't wait to. I just couldn't wait to do it, and I took it to Robin. And I've got no idea to this day why they commissioned the pilot. I read it because they didn't
like it. Did they?
Didn't understand it. It wasn't they didn't like it, but I think in a way that's better, because if they didn't like it, they wouldn't have done it. They thought, we don't know what this is, so he seems to think he knows. And that was the wonderful thing at the BBC at the time. They were big enough and rich enough they could afford to do a pilot if it didn't work, So they just said to me, go and do it.
On that very subject as well, you not only do it, but you subvert youth culture programs in the pilot episode with that, I've forgotten the name of it now.
Nosing
around. Yeah.
Ben, that's a whole Ben thing.
But Ben going all manic to the
Oxford
up
Road
to
Show,
11.
mistake of the Oxford Road Show.
Well, that's so brave. Your first episode, just showing how it's not done as well.
With the young ones, there was never any point in not doing what you could do. So they said to me when they gave it to me, look, we know it's mad, we know it's off the wall. Just tell us what we can't do. And I said to once I gathered my team together, I said to them, we're not going to not do any of this, are we? We're going to find out a way to do this. And they really got wrapped up in it. And the lighting guys, the sound guys, the costume guys, they were brilliant. And they just said, no, hang on, I'll work it out. They later on told me, so the way you do a sitcom, it's pretty standard. You get a bit of pre-filming, then you get a week's rehearsal at Northampton, and then you do the studio day. Normally only one day for a sitcom, but we were entertainment, so we could never have done those shows in one day. So we got a 2-day shoot, which was massively
Even
important.
2 days doesn't seem
No,
enough.
I tell you what, it was pushing the envelope. But on the Thursday of the week, so your Saturday, Sunday shoot, on the Thursday you get all the tech crew come and they watch your run through, because obviously they've got to work out their plot, they've got to see what's going to happen. So you're in this big wooden floored room, rehearsal room, with all the set marked out in tape on the floor, and they run it for you. They do the thing, and all the lighting guys are running around, and you have to warn people who haven't done it before, don't expect laughs, because they're not actually watching you, they're not listening to the comedy, they're putting a dot on their map where you are. And actually we got some laughs, which was really pretty unheard of. People were actually laughing. And then the boys went up and I said, go and have a coffee, and you sit down with the team. And one of them, I can't remember who, one of them said, Paul, I just want to say thank God. And I said, why? They said, because when we read this, we had no idea what the fuck you were up to. We just thought this was... And now, he said, now I can see it.
Okay.
And it's going to be brilliant, and my sound is good, my lighting, it's going to be the best I've ever done, because this is brilliant. And they were all like, yes!
All rose to the standard of each
Rose
other,
to the standard of the writing and the performance that they just seen as well. Because again, once you get to the Two Ronnies, you don't give any performance at all on that tech. I'll stand here and I'll say this, and then I'll walk over here. And Rik and Ade, you can't. They're natural performers, and people started to laugh a bit, and then they upped the ante, and then
That's good to get that enthusiasm from all the crew. That makes it more than work, doesn't it?
Well, you know what? The Young Ones was just brilliant fun. I mean, the filming on the Young Ones, where we did burn the candle at both ends a little bit, I'm afraid.
Well, it's a show that's quite... I mean, it's well known for its stunts, and the injuries are quite well known. But we wondered if you had a particular favourite near-death experience of any of the cast.
The stupid experience was me. So there's an episode in the second season, I think, where they go back to a medieval village. And Nigel is a knight in armour and rides up to all these peasants. Or I think Lee may have been a peasant, actually.
He was.
And he's riding through, and he comes to the village. Somebody frightens the horse, and he has to fall off the horse into a puddle. And we were shooting this the day after a big night out. And when we had a night out on the Young Ones, it was a big night. And I tell you almost certainly, I don't remember, but I bet you Hale and Pace were down for that village shoot, because whenever Gareth and Norman came down, that's when we had a big night. And we were not good that morning. It was so slow and turgid, and nothing was happening. I had a head like a bloody steam hammer. I couldn't think. Very stupid way to behave. But we got to the shot, and I did Nigel, fair enough, rearing back, and then I had to get him splashing into the puddle to cut the two shots together. And he was kind of wimping about a bit and saying, how should I fall? I don't know. And I just lost it. I came running out of the truck. Ed was on the floor, and I said, Ed! I went running out of the truck and went to the back. I said, Nigel, you go like this. And I threw myself back into this quite deep puddle. It turned out quite deep, muddy puddle. So I was absolutely covered. And I said, now fucking get on with it, will you? And he did do it, to be fair, he did do it. Of course, I then went back to the truck. I was completely... Ed tells the story. I think Ed said he walked off when he saw me coming down the hill. He said, I don't want anything to do with this. I think he walked off the set. And everybody was a bit pissed off, and they thought we were being a bit stupid, to be absolutely honest. So I wasn't too bothered. I went to costume and said, have you got anything? Because... And, she gave me a hair shirt. She gave me one of the peasants. She said, that's all I've got, Paul.
There you go. You could itch in this all day.
Oh, itchy, hot, the muddy underpants. And I said, come on, Val, you must. And she said, no, that's all I've got. And I thought, okay, fair dues.
Bit of self-flagellation there for you.
It was a bit of self.
Nigel Planer comes and slips her a $5 later on and says, thank you for that. Thank you for hiding the rest of the costume. When you were directing it, how did you find directing? I know, obviously, there were 3 writers, and Ben Elton was in it occasionally, but with Rik as a main cast member, how did you find directing someone who has also written it?
Well, Ben was very often in the room, and so was Lisa, very often, even when they weren't. Obviously, Lisa was never in it, but even when Ben wasn't in it, he would normally, in the week, come past. But he wasn't there all the time. So Rik, in a way, was able, and quite very sensibly did. He became a cast member at that point. So, and I resisted saying to him, Rik, what did that mean? And he said, well, I'm only one of the writers. He didn't like that thing of, I'm the writer. In fact, we did have issues when we were rehearsing, like you always do, and something wouldn't quite work. And they'd all work on it together, and it was very egalitarian.
Yeah.
And Rik never pulled the, look, I'm the writer card, and this is how it's going to be. And in those early stages, they didn't have much idea of how it was going to look. They left that to me, although they learned very quickly and started to write for the shot, so to speak, in the way that Barker always wrote, that the camera will be here and it'll be looking at this. So they learned that very quickly. But Rik never pulled the big I am writer. And what was brilliant, though, was having him in the room, because I know I could at any point go to him and say, is that the joke? Have I got that right?
And most fans know about the fifth housemate that was lurking in the background of some scenes. What was the original idea behind that? And do you feel that it did play?
I think it was a Lisa Mayer idea. Most of those wacky ideas were. And the idea was it was somebody who'd come to a party, I think even before the boys had moved in. They'd gone to one of those all-night, all weekend rave-up parties, and they'd just forgotten to leave, and they were just sitting behind the thing. So we employed this extra and blocked the whole scene. I mean, she'd just come in on the day, recording day. And we say, look, sit behind the sofa there or sit there. And it would just be in a passing shot. And then after the first series, I think we abandoned it. And we never said anything about it. And to be absolutely honest with you, I completely forgot about it for 20 years. And then somebody in Australia spotted it. And it became a social media thing. And I phoned Jeff Posser and said, what was that all about, Jeff? And he said, yes, we had this girl. Nobody can remember who she was. She's never come forward, as far as I know, to say it was me.
Because her face is completely obscured.
Yes, you can't see her at all. People,
there
was a story at one point that it was Lisa. It wasn't. It was Lisa's idea.
Do you find things like that sort of, when new formats come out, whether it's VHS or DVD or on streaming services, certain things get rediscovered by a new audience? For instance, the freeze frames of video freeze frame inserts, that kind of thing. And you find yourself sort of answering the questions again about them, but because people are discovering them for the first time. You find that all of a sudden it's as though a new generation is asking you the same.
Yeah, in a way it is.
Them,
and you do sort of get tired of talking about how Mike was cast and why the flash frames were in. But they were a very specific reaction to when I was at university, we used to have Dylan nights or Clapton nights, and you'd just all get together in a room and you'd play Clapton all night. And the time of the young ones, the VHSs were some of the earliest VHSs must have been series one of young ones, 2 VHSs with 3 episodes each on them. I mean, and people were literally playing them till the tape wore off and trying to freeze frame them to look at things and so on. And we heard about that, and that's really why we put them in, just to give people a bit of a laugh, to try and freeze the frame, which is almost impossible to do, basically.
Back then, I had at the time, advanced VHS thing that could skip forward, like one that had the linear edit.
Yeah.
Do.
That's the only way you could do it. You couldn't do it by hitting the button, because it's
timing.
Most of them are 4 frames. I mean, a sixth of a second.
So my first way of rewatching I first caught it on BBC Two or something. First one I saw was boring, and then still my favourite episode. Then catching them on UK Gold and stuff. I ended up buying them all on VHS and DVD and stuff. My first ones were recording them off of UK Gold. I'm sorry.
Good for you.
But I always had a VHS memory of them, and some of the ones I just originally thought someone fucked up the recording here. I've got a Western thing here. Right. Something went wrong with the channel sort of thing. And I think there are some where the picture is wrong. And I thought that was part of the show as well. So it's a weird...
Well, the Western one was the most immediately jarring. I mean, there was a dripping tap and there was a frog jumping and they got shorter and shorter. We started off at about 4 frames, and in the end we got it down to 1 frame, which is actually invisible. Yeah. Which is what the problem was, because subliminal advertising rules on ITV, you couldn't do that.
And you got made to take them out.
Bill, my dear friend Bill Cotton, called me in. I was down in the edit suite one day. I got a phone call saying Bill wants to see you, and I went up saying, what's this about flash frames in the old one? And I started to tell him this complicated, boring story. And before I'd got to it, he said, Paul, go and take it out. And I said, Bill, really? He said, Paul, go and take it out and go back on the old ones and take them out as well. So I did.
So they weren't originally broadcast, but then they're...
No, they were. They were being broadcast. And John Lloyd and Rob and Doug, and Grant Naylor, were doing Spitting Image at the time. And they thought the whole thing was just so stupid and poncy and self-indulgent. And John and Rob and Doug put up a flash frame caption that said something like, in writing, this is a technical error called a flash frame, but Paul thinks it's really funny and he's doing them in the young ones. It was something like that. Yeah. And Norris McWhirter, the right-wing politician who hated Spitting Image, saw it and realised it was a contravention of the licensing laws because it was a subliminal frame.
Right.
So he complained to ATV, who did Spitting Image, or Central did Spitting Image, and there was a brouhaha about it.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we're just doing this because... So Bill gets a phone call saying, well, hang on, just because it's not against your rules, you shouldn't be doing it. It's subliminal. Phones me up from the edit. And luckily, I already knew him quite. He became a very dear friend. And he just said, Paul, take it out.
Yeah.
And
But Bill, there's no punchline to the joke.
are there any deleted scenes that have never seen the light of day?
I don't think so. The only scene I remember having to edit and being annoyed at, I know Ed talks in his talk with you about the fact you never really chop a scene if you can possibly avoid it, and we didn't ever on Young Ones. You trim and cut around. But there was one scene that we were made to cut, which is where Rik leaves his 2 teddy bears on the bed when he's been in the bedroom, and he goes out and puts the 2 teddy bears, which is quite a sweet little thing. He's got teddy bears in his bedroom. As soon as the door closes, the one hops on top of the other and starts shagging. And, we were told to cut it. I mean, just unbelievable. Can you believe that? So I had to cut it. I mean, it only happened once in the whole of the 12 episodes of the Young Ones. So it's not like it's a draconian system, but when it said no, it said no. You just had to go and cut it.
For once in 12 episodes, that's a good track record.
Exactly. And I didn't mind it. And so we cut that. And I don't know, has that ever been released on a DVD, or I don't know if it has.
Never seen that.
I've got a memory of that. You say it, though.
It probably has been included in it. It wasn't on the first broadcast, but...
So that was sort of the puppets thing, was it? It was a puppet cutaway? Or
no, so it was 2 teddy bears, literally.
Yeah.
So we did puppet teddy, but this wasn't even a puppet teddy. It was the silly joke was Rik, this big bold. He had teddy bears in his bedroom. He had his 2 teddy bears, and he did it very sweetly. You go to sleep, and then the moment he was out, and he was on top of it. The big one that we argued about and won was the Tampax scene in
The little
Party
mouse.
in the little mouse in the telescope, which they wanted cut completely. They wanted the whole scene out.
Because it's about girls and bodily fluids. It's disgusting, isn't it?
And when Ade goes down and does press-ups to show how hard he is, they thought that was fucking the floor. They said, well, you've got to cut that bit where Ade's fucking the floor. I said, what? Yeah, he's fucking the floor. I said, no, he's not. He's doing press-ups to show how strong he is. Well, why is it such a big laugh? Because it's funny, a bloke being so stupid. Anyway, power to their elbow, Lisa came in on that particular meeting and said, this is something that 50% of the world do for quite a large part of their life. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
How can you... And I think it was Jim Moyer. Jim said, you know what? Fair point.
Yeah, and the joke's on Rick's ignorance.
The joke's on Rick's ignorance.
Yeah.
The whole thing is about, when I was a kid, never look in a lady's handbag. Whenever my aunts or leave a handbag and you don't touch a lady's handbag, presumably, I now assume for that reason. And so the whole joke was he's so... he's right on and with the girls, and he doesn't know what a tampax is. And, it just... But Lisa spoke really persuasively. And, of course, Rik and Lisa wrote this essay. You know that story?
No.
Rik and, when we'd finished the first series, I think, there was suddenly a whole question about, could it go out at all? And, why was it all anti what a lot of what the BBC were doing and critical of their own shows and so on.
Yeah.
And we were asked to justify it. And, again, Rik and Lisa and I don't think Ben was involved in that one, went into this meeting with Jim Moyer, I think it would have been, or Robin Nash, one or the other. And we had this long discussion, and whoever it was said, well, do you think you could write that as a paper for me? And Rik and Lisa went away and wrote this, they were only just out of uni. They wrote this academic, like a grade paper, about what Young Ones was and what the cartoon violence was and what the politics were and the me generation and what the 4 characters represent. I mean, it's a really academic paper. I wish I'd kept it. And it was on file at the BBC for quite a long time because a friend of mine who was a production manager at the BBC years later said to me, I was researching for a show about the Young Ones and I found this incredible essay. Did you know it existed? And I said, oh, yeah, I gave it in. And it was at that time still in the files. I mean, I should have said to her, get me a copy, but...
Well, I wonder if it would still be
track that
there.
down.
Well, I've got, I don't have a date for it yet, but as part of the research for the book, I've got a slot booked for the BBC Archives at some point when they're sort of getting their system back in order, because they're only just opened up now after COVID. And I asked for all their materials related to Bottom, which they said they didn't have a huge amount. So to add to it, I said, can I steal your materials related to the Young Ones as well? So if it's in there...
this was only about 4 or 5 years ago, she said to me.
Okay.
And it would have been filed somewhere. We would have written it between recording the first series and broadcasting the first series. So it would have been in that window.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you feel any pressure for Series 2 to live up to Series 1?
No, I think when the first one went out, we used to for a time, we all used to go for a meal on the day it went out. We used to, well, the very first one, they all came around to my house, and then we went for a meal up on Clapham Common. We said, just as we were sitting there before it went out, look, whether this works or not, it doesn't matter, because we know we've done what we set out to do. We know that these 6 shows are, as best as we could achieve it, what we set out to do. And so if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And, you know, it's been a great ride. And if it does work, that's good. And then, of course, it worked really well. And it was just a barrel of fun, really. And then they came back and asked for the second one. And yeah, God, it's great. But immediately, but we're not doing any more, you know. And the big argument was 40 Towers was only 12. Why should we presume to do more than
Gervais
John
said
Cleese?
that for a while.
So we'll write the last one as we'll kill them off in the last one. It will be the last one.
They were intended to, that's them dead, not because they die in the first episode.
Well, yes, bombs go off and the house explodes in the first. No, that was them, and then we did the black skeletons on the credits. You know, we did that very strange credits where everybody just gets on a roll call rather than the categories. Yeah, it was absolutely written as they get killed. Yeah.
Hi, this is Matt Brooks from the future, editing this episode, and it's quite a long one, and we've decided to cut this one into 2 parts because, as I said, it's a long episode. Us 3 are not going to cut out much of what the legendary Paul Jackson has to say about the comedy industry. We wanted to keep nearly all of this, so join us for part 2, where Paul Jackson will talk more about his contributions to what we feel is the incredibly important art form comedy. That sounds like I'm taking the piss, but no, seriously. But join us for part 2 next week, or probably about the same time. No, fuck it, let's release them both at the same time. You can download the next one right now.